assume these aren't the kind of numbers that you guys want to see an increase on the monthly, annualized, and core inflation rates.
You know what? I always look at the data picture. Don't overly weight one data point, and the overall picture looks good.
Absolutely. You see, maybe you're worried about rent or food. You don't see the picture. See, it's the overall picture. I don't want to hear about your grocery prices. Joining me now, the amazing Carol Roth to break down this unmitigated freaking disaster. Author of the book, You Will Own Nothing, which might have something to do with what we're seeing today. Carol, did you see the whole picture? I hope you're not focusing on little things like rent. It's the picture, Carol.
Yes, I have a very clear picture of the data picture, and that is a nation that has $34+ trillion in debt, that has debt to GDP at an emerging market in crisis levels. We have deficits to GDP at more than 2 times historic averages. We have a personal saving rate that is down well below historic average. We have record household debt. We have increasing credit card delinquencies, inflation where the middle and working class can't afford the basic cost of living. Housing supply isn't there even if you could afford a house, and people working multiple jobs. So that's the picture that I'm looking at, and it looks a little bit more like the gates of hell than the sunshine and rainbows that Lyle Brainerd might be looking at.
Carol, okay, it's very clear that the administration is going to try for a tactic that is odd, but maybe it's the only tactic they have. Here they are, shrinkflation is what they're saying.
Growth is strong, wages are rising, inflation is down. In fact, the costs have fallen from a gallon of gas to a gallon of milk. We know prices are still too high because of what I call greedflation and shrinkflation.
Carol, I despise Biden, so maybe I'm just extremely biased, and I admit my biases, but tell me that grades on the average American who can't make it. They're watching, as you just laid out, their standard of living disappear as the credit card debt rises and the savings shrink, and the president's blaming Doritos?
Shrinkflation. He was in the pool, Jesse. He was in the pool. It was shrinkage.
Yes.
It's crazy. Certainly, there has been shrinkflation, which is, that bag of Doritos they used to buy that had, 100 Doritos in there now has 80s, or the candy bars half the size. But that is not in the numbers. In fact, it is basically trying to work against the numbers because the cost of everything has gone up so much. And we just said that savings are down and debt is up on personal balance sheets. Consumers can't afford to keep pace with the cost of living. So they couldn't afford to buy the Doritos bag if it had the 100 Doritos in like it did before. So the manufacturers are basically making a trade-off and saying, well, we're going to have to price it at the level that they can afford it. And that means that there's going to be less in it. So it is a derivative impact of all of this ridiculous monetary and fiscal policy that folks like you and I have been, screaming about for years, saying that this was going to be the impact because it was utterly predictable. All of this was utterly predictable. All of this has been a wholesale transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. All of this has been a gift to allow the states and the federal governments to continue to be bloated and do what they want to do and give the big people more power. And that's the intention. And you are paying for it, whether it's a higher cost of living or getting less for what it is you pay for. But it's their policy. It's not some greedy corporation. Corporations didn't decide that they're going to be greedy this year and last year and not for the rest of time.
Carol, you wrote a piece about our love of debt and how it's getting, quote, dangerous. What do you mean by that? How dangerous are we talking? Obviously, the debt crisis is coming. There's probably nothing that can stop that now or nothing that will stop that. But what do you mean by dangerous? What are we looking at?
Yeah, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon calls it the most predictable crisis in history. The rating agencies have downgraded the U.S. debt. The CBO, the IMF, the Fed, the Treasury have all said that we are on an unsustainable fiscal path. The latest CBO report, which came out within the last week for the next 10 years, is saying that not only is our debt to GDP going to reach historic levels, but in the aggregate, it's expected within the next 10 years to reach a level of $54 trillion. If we did not have the world's reserve currency, we would have been in a currency crisis as it is. But at some point, you can't just keep relying on debt and not expecting that it has the ultimate of implications. We've had a taste of it. We had that 40 plus year historic inflation, and they're trying to get that rate under control, but it's still compounded. But if the government does not get it together, we are going to be in something called fiscal dominance, where the fiscal policy dominates monetary policy, and there is just going to be consistent out of control inflation, and all of the decisions that are being made are all feeding into this. And it can be stopped if anyone had the political will to do so. But unfortunately, we're just seeing more and more of the same. Everybody sees the problem, everyone acknowledges the problem, but zero people are willing to address the problem.
Why? Is it just because the American people don't care, therefore the politicians don't care? And I ask a psychological question of a finance person, just because I find it so maddening, Carol, that everything you just said is so true, and it's not Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or middle. It's basic math. It's a guarantee. We are racing towards the cliff. The debt crisis that will permanently decrease our standard of living is coming, and nobody, Republican or Democrat, wants to do anything about it.
Yeah, well, finance and economics are psychological. So, this is all very much related, but it just comes down to basic power and greed. It takes a lot of fortitude. It takes the willingness to say this may hurt me politically, to come out and tell the truth, to say there is basic math that cannot be avoided. There are only so many ways that we can raise quote unquote revenue, and only so much spending that can be made. And guess what? We made promises that we can't fulfill. Nobody wants to be the one to take away their own personal power, their benefits, their money, to be the one to stand up there and say it. And the people who are willing to say it, the folks like me and you who are saying it, we don't want to be a part of the political process, because they have made that so completely unpalatable, because they come after your family and they put you through the ringer, and nobody who wants to be in that job should be in that job, and anybody who should be in that job doesn't want to be in that job. So we have this crazy dichotomy. Plus, we have an entire populace that does not have any economic or financial literacy, and that is by design. The education system, which our tax dollars have paid for, are teaching them, social and emotional crap, and they cannot do basic math. They don't understand basic principles. And again, that feeds the power cycle, because, it keeps people on the government dole, because they just say, well, I want to get my $1,000 stimulus check. And when people like you and I go, well, that's going to cost us more than $10,000 for the rest of our lives in terms of cost of living, people go, oh, no, I just want my $1,000. And that's why we're at where we are today.
Carol, all right, to wrap this up, you mentioned the credit card debt. This is one of those things, I can't get it out of my mind. It's gnawing at me. I was actually thinking about it this morning when I woke up. The credit card debt people are piling up. Game this out for me. How does that end? Because obviously people ringing up 22% interest credit card bills, and then they're going to get to the point where they can't pay back those bills, or they're going to sacrifice other bills. I don't know how this ends, but over $1 trillion in personal credit card debt is a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, it ends in one way or another that ends up being bad for the economy. Either it ends up that people are using all of their money to basically pay down these crazy interest rates, and eventually that principal, if they can even get to it, and so they don't have money to spend in other places, or there ends up being some sort of a crisis that comes on the back of this, and or many of the other things that have happened on the back of debt throughout the economy, not just personal in individual debt and consumer debt, but also things like real estate debt, which we certainly on the commercial side, and particularly in the office sector, we have not gotten, out of that potentially being a crisis. So far too much debt was issued when the prices of debt were low. Now the prices of debt are higher. Now people can't afford, the cost of living. It ends up being this very vicious cycle, but there isn't a real good endpoint without something popping. And unfortunately, we've seen that over and over again, and we all end up paying the price for that.